Under the blinding lights of the Millionaire's auction, where money spoke louder than reason, a horse stood alone in its stall. It was a peculiar sight among sleek thoroughbreds with glossy coats and impeccable lineage. This one looked almost forgotten. Its ribs weren't showing, nor was it in poor health, but something about it made the buyers scoff. It lacked the polished sheen of a prized racehorse or the imposing stature of a champion stallion. While the other horses fetched eye-watering sums, this one remained unsold, ignored like a relic in a room full of gold. No one wanted to risk their fortune on something that looked so ordinary. The auctioneer, a man who had seen decades of horse trading, gave a strained smile as he called for bids. Silence. A murmur rippled through the wealthy attendees, some exchanging amused glances, others shaking their heads. It was a waste of time, they thought. No thoroughbred pedigree, no impressive track record, just a horse standing there with an almost eerie stillness. The auctioneer sighed, ready to move on. But then, from the back of the crowd, a voice spoke up. It was deep, steady, and didn't carry the arrogance of wealth. A man, dressed in a worn-out coat and boots that had seen years of hard labor, stepped forward. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in a place where the rich played their games. He wasn't part of their world, nor did he want to be. His hands bore the calluses of someone who knew work, not as a choice, but as survival. The crowd parted slightly as they turned to look at him, confusion flashing in their eyes. What was a man like him doing here? He wasn't one of them. The old farmer didn't hesitate. He raised his hand, signaling his bid. The room erupted in whispers. Laughter, even. Was he serious? Did he even have the money? The auctioneer hesitated for a second before calling it. No one else bid. Why would they? It wasn't worth the effort. Sold, the auctioneer finally declared, almost amused by the absurdity of it. The farmer approached the stall where the horse stood, its dark eyes locking onto his. Up close, the animal seemed different. There was intelligence there, something beyond what the others had seen. He placed a hand against its side, feeling the warmth beneath the coarse hair. The horse didn't flinch. Instead, it simply watched him, unblinking. He led it away as the murmurs followed him out, the air thick with dismissal and mockery. The rich could afford to laugh at his decision. To them, it was a fool's purchase. But the farmer? He had spent his life trusting instincts honed by years of hardship, by knowing that value isn't always where people expect it to be. The journey back home was long, the road stretching under the fading light. The horse walked beside him, its steps eerily in sync with his own. It didn't act skittish like a neglected creature, nor stubborn like an untrained one. It simply walked, as if it understood where it was going. By the time they reached his farm, the night had settled in. The land was quiet, save for the rustling wind against the wooden fence. He led the horse into an open pasture, releasing the rope. Most horses, after a long trip, would wander, explore, maybe even bolt. But this one didn't. It turned its head slightly, as if waiting for something. Watching. The farmer felt a strange unease crawl up his spine. There was something about this animal that didn't fit. Something off, yet not in a way that made sense. He shook the thought away, exhaustion weighing on him. The answers, if there were any, could wait until morning. But the horse didn't wait. That night, something happened. Something that made the old man shoot up in bed, heart pounding, breath shallow. He wasn't sure at first what had woken him, the wind? A distant sound? He listened, straining against the silence. Then he heard it. A noise that shouldn't be there. He pushed open the door, stepping onto the porch. The moon cast long shadows across the field, bathing everything in silver. His eyes scanned the land until they stopped. The horse stood there, still as stone. but it wasn't where he had left it. It was closer, and it was watching him. Something was very, very wrong. The horse stood motionless under the moon's glow, its dark eyes locked onto the farmer. There was no fear, no confusion, just an unnatural stillness that sent an uneasy chill down his spine. It hadn't moved like a restless animal would, nor did it seem startled by the night. It had closed the distance between them, and yet the farmer hadn't heard so much as a rustle of grass. His instincts, the ones that had guided him through years of back-breaking work and hard decisions, whispered that something was very wrong. He stepped off the porch, his boots pressing into the damp soil. The night carried the usual sounds, distant crickets, the rustling of trees, but underneath it all was a silence that felt deliberate. The horse didn't react as he approached, its breath slow and steady. The farmer reached for the rope still looped around its neck, fingers brushing against its coarse hair. For the first time, the animal moved not away, not with resistance, but with a deliberate tilt of its head, as if studying him just as much as he was studying it. A sudden gust of wind swept through the pasture, rattling the old fence posts. But the horse didn't flinch. It didn't blink. The farmer narrowed his eyes, gripping the rope tighter. He had seen horses his entire life, trained them, raised them, even lost a few to old age or misfortune. But nothing about this creature felt familiar. It was too calm, too calculating, like it was waiting for something he hadn't yet realized. Then, without warning, the ground trembled. It wasn't an earthquake, not the deep, rolling kind that split the land, but a single, sharp jolt, as if something massive had shifted beneath them. The farmer's breath caught, his body tensing. The horse remained unbothered. If anything, its ears twitched forward, alert but not surprised. The farmer turned, scanning the land. Nothing had changed, yet the air carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Then he saw it. At the far end of his property, past the wooden fence and the stretch of open field, something pulsed beneath the soil. A faint glow, almost imperceptible, like embers buried under ash. It flickered once, twice, then faded. His stomach tightened. He wasn't a man given to superstition, but he knew when something didn't belong. His first instinct was to back away, to put distance between himself and whatever was lurking beneath his land. But the horse stepped forward. Not in panic. Not in confusion. It moved with purpose. The farmer's grip on the rope tightened as he pulled back, but the horse resisted not with force, but with an unshakable determination. Its muscles tensed, its head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as if tasting something in the air. It wasn't afraid. It knew. The farmer swallowed hard. Whatever this was, it hadn't started tonight. The auction, the dismissive rich men, the way no one had wanted this animal, none of it was a coincidence. He had brought something home, something he didn't understand, and now the ground itself was reacting to it. Then the horse turned its head toward him, and for the first time, he really saw it. Its eyes. They weren't the dull, lifeless orbs of an unwanted beast. They burned, deep within, like a dying fire struggling for air. It was only for a second, but in that second, the farmer felt something press against his mind. Not words, not thoughts. A presence. The horse blinked, and the moment was gone. But the air was no longer the same, and neither was he. A deep unease settled in the farmer's chest, an instinct older than reason itself. He had spent his life working the land, learning its rhythms, understanding its quiet warnings. But this was something beyond anything he had ever known. The glow beneath the soil had vanished, but the weight of its presence lingered. And the horse was watching him with an intensity that sent a slow, creeping realization through his bones. It had never been an ordinary animal. He hadn't just bought a horse at that auction, he had brought home something far more than flesh and bone. The wind stirred again, colder this time, sharp as a blade against his skin. The ground trembled beneath his boots, just a slight vibration, but enough to make him step back. He turned his gaze to the fence line where the glow had been. For a moment, all was still. Then the earth cracked. A jagged line split the pasture, dark and gaping. It wasn't a natural break, it was too precise, too deliberate, as if something beneath the soil had been waiting for permission to rise. The horse stepped forward again, unbothered, unafraid. The farmer gritted his teeth, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run. But then, it happened. From the broken earth, something began to emerge. It wasn't rock, nor root, nor anything the farmer had words for. It gleamed beneath the moonlight, metal-like but shifting, almost alive. Patterns rippled across its surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, as if recognizing the presence of the horse, the structure, whatever it was, came fully into view. The farmer stumbled back, breath caught in his throat. It was massive, ancient, something that had no place beneath his quiet stretch of land. And yet, it had been there all along, buried beneath generations of crops and toil. He turned to the horse, his pulse hammering. "What are you?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. The horse finally reacted. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with a slow, deliberate lowering of its head. And then, before his eyes, its form shifted. It was subtle at first, like a ripple across water. But then the changes became undeniable. The dullness of its coat faded, revealing an iridescence that shimmered in the low light. Its muscles tensed, its shape altering, no longer bound by the limitations of an ordinary animal. It wasn't just a horse. It had never been just a horse. The realization hit him like a hammer. This creature had been hiding, waiting, choosing the right moment to return to whatever it had been before. And he, an old farmer with nothing but his land and his instincts, had been the one to unknowingly set it free. The structure pulsed again, and then a sound echoed across the night. Not a roar, not a hum, something deeper, something ancient, a call that hadn't been heard in centuries. The horse turned something else, lifted its head, responding in silence. The connection between them was undeniable now. It hadn't needed a champion. It had needed a guide. For the first time, the farmer felt no fear, only understanding. As the ground sealed itself once more, as the presence beneath the earth settled, the shimmering being that had once been a mere horse turned its gaze to him one last time. A silent farewell. And then, in a flash of movement too fast for the eye to follow, it was gone. The land was quiet again, unchanged to anyone who might see it in the morning. But the farmer knew better. He had witnessed something few ever would, something that defied explanation. He turned toward his home, stepping carefully over the place where the ground had split. He had come to that auction expecting nothing, but what he had found had changed everything.